My sister Rachel screamed at me to get out of her wedding because I was embarrassing the family in my simple black dress. What she didn't know was that my security team was already positioned around the venue, and in exactly 30 minutes, they'd be addressing me as Agent Thompson while she watched her perfect day crumble around her. The look of absolute terror on her face when she realized who I really was. That was just the beginning of everything she was about to lose. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning of Rachel's wedding started like every other family gathering had for the past 5 years, with me being treated like the disappointing younger sister who never quite measured up to expectations. I stood in the bridal suite of the Grand Oak Manor, watching my sister examine herself in the three-way mirror, while our mother Linda fussed over every detail of her elaborate ivory gown. The dress alone cost more than most people's cars, covered in hand-sewn pearls and imported French lace that caught the light from the crystal chandelier above us. Rachel had always been the golden child in our family. At 28, she was 2 years older than me and had followed the exact path our parents had mapped out for her success. Business degree from State University, immediately followed by a marketing position at a prestigious firm downtown, then a swift climb up the corporate ladder that led to her current role as regional director. She drove a BMW, lived in a penthouse apartment overlooking the city, and was marrying David Chen, a successful investment banker whose family owned half the commercial real estate in Denver. I was Emma Thompson, and to everyone in that room, I was the family disappointment who had somehow lost her way after college. While Rachel collected promotions and accolades, I had seemingly drifted from one vague government job to another, never staying anywhere long enough to build a real career. I lived in a modest apartment, drove a basic sedan, and my dating life was practically non-existent according to family gossip. When people asked what I did for work, I gave the same rehearsed answer I'd been using for 6 years. Administrative work for various federal agencies, mostly travel coordination and scheduling support. What they didn't know, what I'd never told a single person in my family, was that I was one of the youngest agents ever assigned to the Presidential Protection Detail. For the past 3 years, I'd been part of an elite team responsible for safeguarding the most powerful person in the world. My travel coordination involved advanced security planning for Air Force One. My scheduling support meant coordinating with CIA, FBI, and international intelligence agencies to ensure presidential safety during state visits and diplomatic meetings. The training alone had been more intense than anything Rachel could imagine. 2 years at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center, followed by specialized programs in counter-surveillance, emergency medical response, advanced firearms training, and threat assessment. I could speak 4 languages fluently, had completed survival training in 6 different environments, and held security clearances that gave me access to information that could destabilize governments. But to my family, I was just Emma who couldn't seem to get her life together. The sister who missed family dinners because of work commitments they assumed were unimportant. The daughter who couldn't afford designer clothes or luxury vacations because her salary was supposedly too modest for such extravagances. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The woman who never brought anyone home for holidays because my relationships never seemed to last, not understanding that dating was complicated when your job required complete discretion about your identity and location. Rachel examined her reflection one final time before turning to address the room full of bridesmaids, family members, and wedding coordinators who had been bustling around her for the past 3 hours. Her voice carried the commanding tone of someone accustomed to being the center of attention and having her instructions followed without question. Ladies, we need to discuss the final details before the ceremony begins. The photographer will be taking family portraits in 15 minutes, and I want everyone looking absolutely perfect. This day has been planned for 18 months, and every single detail matters. She gestured toward her maid of honor, her college roommate Jessica, who was frantically checking items off a detailed timeline printed on expensive cardstock. My mother Linda beamed with pride as she adjusted Rachel's veil for the 10th time. This was the wedding she had dreamed about since Rachel was born, complete with 300 guests, a live orchestra, and a reception dinner that cost more per plate than most people spent on groceries in a month. The guest list read like a who's who of Denver's business and social elite, exactly the kind of connections that would benefit Rachel's career and social standing. I stood near the window in my simple black dress, the one I'd chosen because it was elegant, but understated. Appropriate for a family wedding without drawing attention away from the bride. The dress had cost me $200, which Rachel had somehow discovered and mentioned to our mother with barely concealed disdain. Apparently, wearing anything that cost less than $500 to her wedding was somehow insulting to the significance of the occasion. "Emma," Rachel called sharply, causing every head in the room to turn toward me. "We need to talk about your dress situation. I specifically told you that this was a formal event, and you show up looking like you're attending a business meeting rather than your sister's wedding." The room fell silent, except for the soft classical music playing from hidden speakers throughout the suite. I felt the familiar flush of embarrassment that came with being publicly criticized by Rachel in front of family members and her friends. This had been happening for years, her subtle and not-so-subtle comments about my appearance, my career choices, and my general failure to meet the family's expectations for success and sophistication. "The dress is appropriate for a formal wedding," I replied quietly, hoping to avoid escalating the situation in front of so many witnesses. "It's conservative and respectful of the occasion." Rachel's laugh had an edge to it that made several bridesmaids exchange uncomfortable glances. "Conservative and respectful are one thing, Emma, but looking like you bought your outfit at a discount store is something else entirely. This is supposed to be the most important day of my life, and everyone here is going to be photographed extensively. Those photos will be seen by some very important people." Our mother stepped forward with a diplomatic expression she'd perfected over years of managing Rachel's dramatic tendencies. "Rachel, honey, maybe we should focus on getting you ready for the ceremony. Emma looks lovely, and family is what matters most today." But Rachel was just getting started. She turned to face me directly, her expression taking on the cold calculation of someone delivering a business presentation to a disappointing subordinate. "Mother, you don't understand the level we're operating at here. David's family has connections throughout the city, and the guest list includes people who could significantly impact my career trajectory. How Emma presents herself reflects on all of us." I felt something twist in my stomach as I realized where this conversation was heading. Rachel wasn't just criticizing my appearance. She was building towards something bigger, and the room full of witnesses suggested she wanted maximum impact for whatever point she was about to make. "Furthermore," she continued, her voice growing stronger as she gained momentum, "I think we need to address the larger issue here. Emma, you're 26 years old, and you still don't seem to understand how adult responsibility works. You show up to family events in discount clothing, you can't maintain a stable relationship, and your career seems to consist of jumping from one entry-level government job to another without any clear direction or advancement." The words hit like physical blows, each one designed to highlight my apparent failures in front of people who would undoubtedly discuss this conversation at the reception and beyond. I could see some of Rachel's friends nodding in agreement, probably relieved that they weren't the target of her attention, but willing to support her assessment of my shortcomings. "Rachel," I said carefully, trying to keep my voice steady, "this is your wedding day. Maybe we could have this conversation another time, in private." Her eyes flashed with something that looked like genuine anger. "No, Emma, I think this conversation is long overdue. Our entire family has been tiptoeing around your situation for years, making excuses for your lack of ambition and general failure to launch into a real adult life. Well, today is too important for me to pretend that everything is fine when it clearly isn't." The room had gone completely silent now. Even the wedding coordinator had stopped checking her timeline to watch the drama unfolding between the bride and her sister. I could feel my face burning with humiliation as Rachel continued her public dismantling of my life and choices. "Look around this room, Emma. Look at the people I've surrounded myself with. Successful professionals, accomplished women who have built careers and relationships that matter. And then look at yourself. You're nearly 30, living in a studio apartment, driving a car that's older than some of our high school memories, and working jobs that apparently don't pay enough for you to dress appropriately for your own sister's wedding." I had reached my breaking point, but not in the way Rachel expected. For 6 years, I had endured her condescension and criticism, while protecting a secret that would have changed everything about how she saw me. For 6 years, I had let her believe that her success made her superior to me while I carried responsibilities that she couldn't even comprehend. And for 6 years, I had convinced myself that maintaining my cover was more important than defending my dignity. But standing in that bridal suite, surrounded by people who were nodding along with Rachel's assessment of my failures, I realized that some humiliations were simply too much to bear in silence. "You're right, Rachel," I said, my voice taking on a clarity that surprised even me. "This conversation is long overdue. And you're absolutely right that today is too important for pretending everything is fine when it clearly isn't." Rachel's expression shifted from triumphant satisfaction to something resembling confusion as my tone registered with her. She had expected me to either apologize meekly or storm out in embarrassment, giving her the perfect finale to her public humiliation campaign. Instead, I remained standing calmly by the window, my voice steady and my posture straight, looking nothing like the defeated younger sister she had been systematically dismantling for the past 10 minutes. "What exactly do you mean by that?" she asked, her voice carrying a slight edge of uncertainty. The room remained silent, but I could feel the shift in energy as everyone present recognized that something unexpected was happening. I checked my watch with deliberate precision, noting that it was exactly 2:15 in the afternoon. In 45 minutes, the wedding ceremony was scheduled to begin. In 30 minutes, my security team would complete their final perimeter sweep and take their assigned positions throughout the venue. And in approximately 25 minutes, my cover would be blown in the most spectacular way possible. But Rachel didn't know that yet. "I mean that you've spent the last 10 minutes giving everyone in this room a detailed analysis of my shortcomings without actually knowing anything about my life, my career, or my circumstances," I replied, meeting her gaze directly. "And you've done it with such confidence that I'm genuinely curious about where that certainty comes from." Our mother stepped forward again, her diplomatic instincts sensing that the conversation was taking a dangerous turn. "Girls, please, let's not let emotions get the better of us on such an important day. We can discuss family matters later in private." But Rachel was not about to be redirected. She had committed to this public confrontation, and her personality demanded that she see it through to a decisive victory. "Mother, Emma is the one who chose to challenge me instead of simply acknowledging that her appearance and general life situation are inappropriate for this occasion. If she wants to defend her choices, I'm certainly willing to listen to her explanation." The challenge in her voice was unmistakable, and everyone in the room understood that this had moved beyond a simple disagreement about wedding attire. This was Rachel asserting her dominance in the family hierarchy, using her wedding day as the perfect platform to establish once and for all that she was the successful daughter while I was the disappointment who needed to be managed and corrected. "Very well," I said, surprising everyone by accepting her challenge rather than backing down. "Let's discuss my choices and my circumstances. But I want to make sure we're being completely accurate about the facts." Rachel's smile returned, confident that she was about to deliver the finishing blow to whatever weak defense I was preparing to offer. "Please, Emma, enlighten us about how your situation is actually much better than it appears to everyone who knows you." I moved away from the window and positioned myself so that I could see everyone in the room clearly. The bridesmaids, the wedding coordinator, our mother, and Rachel herself were all watching with the fascination of people witnessing what they assumed would be a spectacular failure. They had no idea that they were about to witness something entirely different. "Let's start with my career, since that seems to be your primary concern," I began, my voice taking on the measured tone I used during security briefings. "You mentioned that I jump from one entry-level government job to another, without any clear direction or advancement. Can you tell me specifically which positions you think I've held over the past 6 years?" The question caught Rachel off guard because she realized that her confident assertions were based entirely on assumptions rather than actual knowledge. She had been so busy building her own career that she had never bothered to ask detailed questions about mine. "Well, you've said you do administrative work for federal agencies, travel coordination and scheduling support, things like that." "That's correct," I acknowledged. "I have said that. But did you ever wonder why someone would need to travel so extensively for administrative work? Or why my scheduling support would require me to be unavailable for family events on such short notice?" Our mother frowned slightly, perhaps recognizing for the first time that there might be more to my work situation than the simple explanations I had always provided. "Emma, honey, are you saying that your job is more complicated than you've told us?" Before I could answer, Rachel jumped back into the conversation with renewed confidence. Mother, please don't let Emma deflect from the real issues here. Regardless of what she claims about her work, the facts speak for themselves. She lives in a studio apartment, drives an old car, and clearly doesn't earn enough money to afford appropriate clothing for important family events. You're absolutely right about those facts, I agreed, which seemed to restore Rachel's triumphant expression. I do live in a studio apartment, I do drive an older model sedan, and I am very careful about my spending habits. But have you ever considered why someone might make those choices even if they had other options available? The question hung in the air while Rachel processed the implication that my modest lifestyle might be deliberate rather than a result of financial limitations. Her confidence wavered slightly as she tried to understand what I was suggesting. What other options? She asked, her voice losing some of its earlier certainty. Emma, you work in administrative support for government agencies. There aren't exactly unlimited advancement opportunities in that field. I felt a smile tugging at the corners of my mouth as I realized that Rachel had just provided the perfect opening for what was about to unfold. You're right that advancement opportunities in government work can be limited, but they do exist for people with the right qualifications, training, and security clearances. The mention of security clearances caused a subtle shift in the room's atmosphere. Several people, including our father Robert, who had been quietly observing from near the door, seemed to recognize that the conversation was moving into territory that suggested more complexity than anyone had previously understood. Security clearances? Our mother repeated, her voice carrying genuine curiosity rather than Rachel's dismissive skepticism. Emma, what kind of security clearance do you have? I checked my watch again, noting that 28 minutes remained until the ceremony was scheduled to begin. My team would be completing their final positioning in approximately 15 minutes, which meant I had a very narrow window to navigate this conversation without creating security complications. Let's just say that my clearance level requires extensive background investigations, polygraph examinations, and annual reviews that go far beyond what most people experience in civilian employment. I replied carefully. The kind of clearance that opens doors to opportunities that aren't typically advertised in conventional job markets. Rachel's expression was shifting from confidence to confusion as she tried to reconcile this information with her understanding of my career trajectory. Emma, you're talking like you work for the CIA or something. Administrative assistants don't get high-level security clearances. You're absolutely correct, I agreed. Administrative assistants typically don't require that level of clearance, which should tell you something about whether administrative assistance is actually what I do for a living. The silence that followed was profound and uncomfortable. Everyone in the room was beginning to understand that they had been operating under fundamentally incorrect assumptions about my career, but no one knew quite how to process this revelation or what questions to ask next. Our father stepped forward from his position near the door, his expression serious and thoughtful. Emma, are you saying that you've been deliberately misleading us about the nature of your work? The question was fair and deserved a direct answer, but I was acutely aware that I was approaching the limits of what I could reveal without compromising operational security. Dad, I'm saying that some types of government work require discretion about the specific details of what you do and where you do it. When family members ask about your job, you provide information that's accurate but general enough to avoid discussing classified activities. Rachel's face was cycling through a range of expressions as she tried to process what she was hearing. The confident superiority she had displayed throughout our confrontation was being replaced by something that looked like uncertainty and perhaps the first hints of concern. Classified activities? She repeated slowly. Emma, what exactly do you do for the government? I was saved from having to answer that question directly by the sudden appearance of Sarah Mitchell, the wedding coordinator, who burst into the bridal suite with an expression of barely controlled panic. Mrs. Chen, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation that requires your immediate attention. Rachel turned toward the coordinator with obvious irritation at having her interrogation interrupted at such a crucial moment. Sarah, whatever it is can wait until after the ceremony. We're having an important family discussion right now. But Sarah was not deterred by Rachel's dismissal. Her professional composure was cracking as she struggled to explain something that clearly exceeded her experience with typical wedding complications. Ma'am, I really think you need to know about this immediately. There are federal agents positioned throughout the venue, and they're conducting what appears to be a security sweep of the entire property. The words "federal agents" hit the room like a bomb, causing everyone to freeze in shocked silence. Rachel's face went pale as she processed the implications of law enforcement presence at her wedding, while our parents exchanged worried glances that suggested they were wondering if someone in the family was in legal trouble. "Federal agents?" our mother asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah, are you sure? Why would there be federal agents at a wedding?" Sarah consulted the tablet she carried everywhere, her hands trembling slightly as she read from what appeared to be notes she had taken during conversations with venue security. "Ma'am, they arrived about an hour ago and presented credentials to our security team. They're not here to make arrests or investigate anything. They said they're conducting advanced security preparations for a protected individual who will be attending the ceremony." The room erupted in confused conversations as everyone tried to understand what this meant. Rachel looked around wildly, clearly trying to identify which of her 300 guests might require federal protection, while the bridesmaids whispered among themselves about whether they should be concerned for their safety. "Protected individual?" Rachel demanded, her voice rising with stress and confusion. "Sarah, I personally approved every name on the guest list. There's no one attending this wedding who would need federal protection." I felt my stomach clench as I realized that my carefully maintained cover was about to be destroyed in the most public and dramatic way possible. My security team was following standard protocols for venues where I would be present, which meant they were treating Rachel's wedding exactly like any other location where they needed to ensure my safety. "Ma'am," Sarah continued, consulting her tablet again, "the agents said they're here for someone called Agent Thompson. They mentioned that she's assigned to a high-priority protection detail and requires advanced security measures whenever she attends public events." The name hit the room like another explosion, but this time the shock was focused entirely on me. Every eye turned in my direction, as the implications of what Sarah had just said began to register with varying degrees of understanding and disbelief. "Agent Thompson?" our mother repeated slowly, looking at me with an expression of complete bewilderment. "Emma, your last name is Thompson." Rachel's face had gone from pale to ashen as she stared at me with growing horror. "Emma, what is she talking about? Why would federal agents be here for you? You work in administrative support." I realized that I had reached the point where continued deception was impossible and probably counterproductive. My security team was already in position, my cover was blown, and Rachel's wedding was about to become the most memorable event of her life, for reasons she had never anticipated. "Rachel," I said quietly, "I think it's time for me to be completely honest about what I do for a living." The room fell silent, except for the sound of Sarah's tablet buzzing with what were probably increasingly urgent messages from venue security about the federal presence on the property. Rachel continued staring at me with an expression that suggested she was beginning to understand that everything she thought she knew about her younger sister was about to be proven wrong. "I don't work in administrative support," I continued, my voice taking on the professional tone I used during official briefings. "I'm a federal agent assigned to the Presidential Protection Detail. For the past 3 years, I've been part of the team responsible for safeguarding the President of the United States." The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence that followed. I could see various people processing this information at different speeds, with some immediately grasping the implications while others appeared to be struggling with the basic concept that the family disappointment was actually one of the most elite law enforcement officers in the country. Rachel's mouth opened and closed several times without producing sound, as if her brain was unable to process what she had just heard. The sister she had been publicly humiliating for her lack of career success was apparently responsible for protecting the most powerful person in the world. "Presidential Protection Detail," our father repeated slowly, his voice carrying a mixture of awe and disbelief. "Emma, are you saying that you're Secret Service?" "Yes, Dad," I confirmed, feeling oddly relieved to finally be telling the truth after years of careful deception. "I'm Special Agent Emma Thompson, United States Secret Service, currently assigned to the Presidential Protection Detail." The revelation seemed to unlock everyone's voices at once, creating a cacophony of questions, exclamations, and expressions of shock that filled the bridal suite with chaotic energy. Rachel, however, remained silent, her face cycling through expressions of disbelief, confusion, and what looked like the beginning of genuine panic. "Secret Service?" she whispered finally, her voice barely audible above the conversation swirling around us. "Emma, you're actually Secret Service?" "I am," I confirmed, watching as she struggled to reconcile this information with the image of her unsuccessful younger sister that she had been maintaining for years. "The administrative work I mentioned involves coordinating security for presidential travel. The scheduling support means working with advanced teams to ensure safe venues for official events." Our mother stepped forward, her expression showing a mixture of pride and concern that suggested she was beginning to understand the magnitude of what I had been hiding from the family. "Emma, honey, why didn't you tell us? We had no idea that you were doing something so important." Before I could answer her question, Sarah's tablet erupted with a series of urgent notification sounds that demanded immediate attention. She glanced at the screen, and her face went even paler than it had been before. "Mrs. Chen," she said, her voice tight with stress, "the agents are requesting to speak with Agent Thompson immediately. They said there's been a development that requires her attention." I felt my professional instincts kick in as I recognized the tone of urgency that suggested something more significant than routine security preparations. "What kind of development?" I asked, my voice automatically shifting to the crisp authority I used during official situations. Sarah consulted her tablet again, her hands visibly shaking as she read the message. "They said there's been a credible threat against a high-value target, and all protection details are being activated immediately. They need Agent Thompson to report for emergency briefing and possible deployment." The words "credible threat" and "emergency deployment" hung in the air like a death sentence for Rachel's carefully planned wedding celebration. I could see her face processing the implications of what was happening, understanding that her perfect day was about to be destroyed by circumstances completely beyond her control. "Emma," she said, her voice hollow with dawning realization, "you're going to have to leave, aren't you? You're going to miss my wedding because of your job." I looked at my sister, seeing her not as the condescending older sibling who had been humiliating me for years, but as a bride whose special day was being overshadowed by events she couldn't have anticipated or prevented. Despite everything that had happened between us, I felt a genuine pang of sympathy for her situation. "Rachel, I don't know yet what the situation requires," I said honestly. "I need to speak with my team and get briefed on the threat assessment. But I want you to know that if there's any way for me to stay for your ceremony, I will." For the first time in our conversation, Rachel's expression showed something other than superiority or shock. She looked genuinely vulnerable, like the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms when we were children. "But if you have to go," she said quietly, "if your job requires you to leave right now, then you'll go, won't you? Because protecting the president is more important than anything else." The question revealed an understanding that surprised me. Despite all her earlier criticism about my career choices and life priorities, Rachel had immediately grasped the fundamental reality of my job. When the president needed protection, everything else became secondary, including family obligations and personal relationships. "Yes," I admitted, feeling the weight of that truth settle between us. "If there's a credible threat against the president, then I have to go. That's what I signed up for when I took this job." Rachel nodded slowly, her expression showing a mixture of resignation and what might have been the first glimmer of respect she had ever shown for my professional choices. "I understand," she said quietly. "I don't like it, but I understand." Sarah cleared her throat diplomatically, reminding us that urgent federal agents were waiting for my response to their request for immediate consultation. "Agent Thompson, they're waiting in the venue's security office for your arrival." I looked around the room at the faces of my family members and Rachel's friends, all of whom were staring at me with expressions ranging from awe to confusion to newfound respect. The woman they had known as the underachieving younger sister had just been revealed as someone whose job required her to be prepared to take a bullet for the President of the United States. "I'll be back as soon as I can," I told Rachel, meaning it sincerely despite everything that had transpired between us. "Hopefully this is just a precautionary briefing and I'll be able to attend your ceremony." As I moved toward the door, I heard Rachel's voice behind me, softer than it had been all day. "Emma, be careful. Whatever this threat is, please be careful." I turned back to see her looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen since we were children. For the first time in years, she was looking at me not as a disappointment or a source of embarrassment, but as her little sister who was about to walk into potential danger. "I will. I promised. That's what all the training was for." And with that, I left the bridal suite to meet with my security team, leaving behind a room full of people who were still trying to process the fact that everything they thought they knew about Emma Thompson had just been turned completely upside down. The walk from the bridal suite to the venue's security office felt like crossing into an entirely different world. The elegant hallways of Grand Oak Manor, decorated with white roses and flowing ribbons for Rachel's wedding, suddenly seemed trivial compared to the urgent reality of federal security protocols. My heels clicked against the marble floors with a rhythm that matched my accelerating heartbeat as I prepared to shift from family drama to potential national security crisis. Agent Martinez met me halfway down the corridor, his familiar presence immediately grounding me in the professional mindset I needed for whatever briefing awaited. Carlos Martinez had been my partner for 18 months, and his expression told me everything I needed to know about the seriousness of the situation before he spoke a single word. "Agent Thompson," he said, falling into step beside me with the practiced efficiency of someone who had conducted countless emergency briefings. "We've got a developing situation that requires immediate assessment. The threat level has been elevated to orange, and all protection details are being briefed on potential coordinated attacks." The word coordinated sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the air conditioning in the venue. Coordinated attacks meant multiple targets, sophisticated planning, and the kind of resources that suggested state-sponsored or highly organized terrorist activity. This wasn't a lone individual making threats on social media, or a disgruntled citizen writing angry letters to the White House. "What's the target assessment?" I asked, my voice automatically shifting to the clipped professionalism of emergency protocols. The transformation was so complete that I could feel myself becoming Agent Thompson rather than Emma, the family dynamics of the bridal suite fading into background noise that no longer seemed relevant to my immediate concerns. "Multiple high-value targets across 3 states, Martinez replied as we reached the security office door. "POTUS is currently secure at Camp David, but we've identified credible threats against several cabinet members and other protected individuals who are attending public events today." The implications hit me like a physical blow. Rachel's wedding wasn't just being disrupted by routine security protocols. It was potentially being targeted as part of a larger operation designed to strike at multiple government officials simultaneously. The realization that my sister's special day might be on someone's target list filled me with a cold fury that I had to consciously suppress in order to remain professional. Agent Johnson looked up from a bank of monitors as we entered the security office, his expression grim but focused. Kevin Johnson was the senior agent on our detail, a 20-year veteran whose calm demeanor during crisis situations had earned him the respect of everyone who worked with him. If Kevin looked concerned, then the situation was genuinely serious. "Agent Thompson," he said, gesturing toward a secure tablet that displayed what appeared to be intelligence briefings and threat assessments. "We've been monitoring chatter about potential attacks on soft targets where government officials might be present. Your attendance at this wedding was logged through routine security protocols, which means it's possible that hostile actors are aware of your presence here." I felt my stomach drop as the full implications of what he was saying became clear. My decision to attend Rachel's wedding hadn't just put me at risk. It had potentially put every single person at the venue in danger, including my entire family, and 300 innocent wedding guests who had no idea they were now part of a federal security situation. "How credible is the intelligence?" I asked, scanning the briefing documents on the tablet while mentally calculating evacuation routes and defensive positions throughout the venue. The Grand Oak Manor had been chosen for its elegance and prestige, not for its security features, and I was already identifying multiple vulnerabilities that would complicate any protective response. "Credible enough that we've activated emergency protocols for all protection details nationwide," Johnson replied. "The intelligence indicates sophisticated surveillance of government personnel's personal activities, including family events, social gatherings, and other occasions where security might be reduced." Martinez pulled up additional information on his own tablet, showing surveillance photos and communication intercepts that painted a picture of an operation far more complex than typical domestic threats. The concerning element is the level of detail they have about specific events. This isn't random targeting. Someone has been conducting extensive reconnaissance on the private lives of federal agents and other government personnel. The photographs on his screen showed images that made my blood run cold. Surveillance photos of me entering my apartment building, walking to my car, and arriving at previous family gatherings. Someone had been watching me for weeks or possibly months, documenting my movements and learning my patterns with the thoroughness of professional intelligence operatives. "They know about my family," I said, the words coming out flatter than I intended as I processed the violation of privacy and the potential threat to people I loved. "They've been tracking my personal life." "Yes," Johnson confirmed grimly, "and they know about today's wedding. We have intercepts suggesting that they view family events as optimal targeting opportunities because agents are likely to be off-duty, emotionally distracted, and operating with reduced security protocols." I stared at the surveillance photos while my mind raced through the implications of what this meant for Rachel's wedding and everyone in attendance. The venue was filled with civilians who had no training in emergency procedures, no understanding of security protocols, and no preparation for the possibility that they were attending an event that might be targeted by hostile actors. "What's our current security posture?" I asked, knowing that Johnson and Martinez had already been working to transform a wedding venue into a defensible position while maintaining the appearance of normal celebration activities. "We've positioned agents throughout the property using wedding guest cover identities," Martinez replied, showing me a floor plan of the venue with security positions marked in discrete locations. "Additional backup units are staged in vehicles outside the perimeter, and we have direct communication with local law enforcement and federal tactical response teams." The efficiency with which my colleagues had transformed Rachel's elegant wedding into a federal security operation was impressive, but it also highlighted the surreal nature of what was happening. While my family had been focused on bridal preparations and ceremony timelines, federal agents had been conducting threat assessments and establishing defensive perimeters around the woman they still thought of as the underachieving younger sister. "Agent Thompson," Johnson said, his voice taking on the tone he used when delivering orders that couldn't be questioned or debated. "We need to discuss your options for handling this situation. You can remain on site with full security protocols in place, or we can evacuate you immediately to a secure location." The choice he was offering wasn't really a choice at all, and we both knew it. Remaining at the wedding meant accepting responsibility for the safety of everyone present, while evacuating meant abandoning my family and 300 innocent people to whatever threat might be developing. Neither option was acceptable from a personal standpoint, but only one was acceptable from a professional perspective. "If I evacuate, what happens to the wedding guests?" I asked, though I already knew the answer would complicate my decision rather than simplify it. "We maintain security protocols as long as necessary to ensure their safety," Johnson replied diplomatically, "but our primary responsibility is your protection, not event security for civilian gatherings." The distinction he was making was technically correct but practically meaningless. If there was a genuine threat against me, then everyone at Rachel's wedding was potentially in danger simply by virtue of being in my vicinity. Evacuating myself might reduce the risk to federal personnel, but it wouldn't necessarily eliminate the threat to innocent civilians who had become inadvertent targets. "How long until we have a clearer threat assessment?" I asked, hoping that additional intelligence might provide options that weren't currently apparent. Martinez consulted his tablet again, scrolling through what appeared to be real-time intelligence updates from multiple federal agencies. "Unknown. The intelligence community is treating this as an active developing situation with potential for immediate escalation. We could have resolution in hours, or this could develop into an extended security operation." I looked through the security office window toward the main ballroom, where Rachel's wedding guests were beginning to gather for the ceremony. From this distance, they looked like any other elegant social gathering, dressed in their formal attire and chatting pleasantly while they waited for the celebration to begin. None of them had any idea that federal agents were positioned throughout the venue, or that their attendance at a family wedding had potentially placed them in the middle of a national security situation. "Agent Thompson," Johnson said quietly, recognizing the internal conflict I was wrestling with. I know this is a difficult situation given your personal connections to the event, but I need to remind you that your primary obligation is to federal security protocols, not to family social functions. His words were measured and professional, but they carried the weight of someone who understood exactly what he was asking me to do. Kevin Johnson had been through similar situations where personal and professional obligations conflicted, and he knew that the decision I was facing would have consequences that extended far beyond the immediate security concerns. I understand my obligations, I replied, meaning it completely, while also recognizing that understanding my duty and being emotionally prepared to execute it were two different things entirely. But I also understand that 300 innocent people are potentially at risk because of my presence here. That's not your fault, Martinez said firmly. You followed proper protocols for notifying security about your attendance at a family event. The fact that hostile actors may have been conducting surveillance on your personal activities doesn't make you responsible for their actions or their targeting decisions. Intellectually, I knew he was correct. I had followed every required procedure for attending off-duty social events, and the decision to potentially target Rachel's wedding wasn't mine to make or prevent. But emotionally, the idea that my job might be putting my family in danger was almost unbearable, especially given the conversation I had just had with Rachel about my career priorities and life choices. A new alert sounded on Johnson's tablet, causing all three of us to focus immediately on whatever update was coming through federal intelligence channels. He read the message with the neutral expression of someone trained to process urgent information without revealing emotional reactions, but I could see subtle changes in his posture that suggested the situation was escalating rather than resolving. Agent Thompson, he said after finishing the message, we've received confirmation that hostile surveillance teams have been identified in the vicinity of multiple events where federal personnel are present today. This is no longer a precautionary briefing. This is an active threat situation requiring immediate protective response. The words transformed our conversation from theoretical discussion of options to concrete implementation of emergency protocols. I was no longer weighing the personal consequences of various decisions. I was now operating under direct orders that required immediate compliance regardless of personal preferences or family obligations. What are my instructions? I asked, though part of me already knew what Johnson was going to say. You have two options, he replied, consulting his tablet again for what appeared to be official guidance from Federal Command Authority. Option 1. Immediate evacuation to secure location with full protection detail. Option 2. Remain on site with enhanced security protocols and accept responsibility for civilian safety within the venue perimeter. The way he presented the choices made it clear that Option 2 was significantly more dangerous and complicated than Option 1, but it also represented the only possibility for protecting my family and Rachel's wedding guests from whatever threat was developing. Choosing evacuation would ensure my safety but would leave everyone else to deal with the consequences of hostile surveillance and potential targeting. If I choose Option 2, what does enhanced security protocol mean for the wedding ceremony? I asked, knowing that the answer would probably involve disruptions that would destroy Rachel's carefully planned celebration. Martinez answered this time, his expression showing sympathy for the impossible situation I was facing. It means converting the venue into a secure facility, with controlled access, guest screening, and visible federal presence. It means treating your sister's wedding like a state function, with all the security measures that entails. I could imagine Rachel's reaction to learning that her elegant celebration was being transformed into something resembling a government function, with metal detectors, security checkpoints, and federal agents monitoring every guest interaction. The wedding she had planned for 18 months would become something entirely different, assuming it proceeded at all. And if I choose Option 1? I asked, though I suspected the answer would be equally unacceptable from a family perspective. Immediate departure with security escort, Johnson replied. The venue would be cleared of federal presence, and local law enforcement would be notified of potential security concerns, but primary responsibility for civilian safety would transfer to appropriate local authorities. Neither choice offered a satisfactory resolution to the situation. Enhanced security would destroy Rachel's wedding while potentially keeping everyone safe, while evacuation would preserve the event but leave family and guests potentially vulnerable to whatever threat had triggered federal concern. A knock on the security office door interrupted our conversation, followed by the appearance of Sarah Mitchell, the wedding coordinator, whose expression suggested that the unusual federal presence at the venue was beginning to affect normal wedding operations in ways that couldn't be concealed much longer. "Agent Thompson," she said, clearly struggling to maintain professional composure while dealing with circumstances far outside her normal experience. "I hate to interrupt, but I have some urgent questions about how to proceed with the ceremony schedule." The fact that she was addressing me rather than the wedding party highlighted how completely the revelation of my identity had changed everyone's understanding of who held authority in this situation. Sarah had recognized that whatever was happening with federal security took precedence over normal wedding logistics, even if she didn't understand the specific nature of the threat. "What kind of questions?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew what she was going to say. "The guests are asking about the increased security presence, and several people have noticed agents positioned throughout the venue," she replied, consulting her ever-present tablet. "Mrs. Chen, your sister, is asking when you're going to return to the bridal suite, and she wants to know if the ceremony is going to proceed on schedule." I looked at Johnson and Martinez, both of whom were watching me with expressions that suggested they understood the weight of the decision I was facing. They were federal agents who had sworn to protect government officials, but they were also human beings who understood that family relationships mattered, even in the context of national security emergencies. "Sarah," I said carefully, "I need you to tell my sister that there's been a development that requires federal attention, but that I'm working to resolve it as quickly as possible." "Agent Thompson," Johnson said quietly, "we need a decision. The threat assessment is ongoing, but we can't maintain this intermediate security posture indefinitely without compromising operational effectiveness." I closed my eyes for a moment, weighing the impossible choice between duty and family, between professional obligations and personal relationships, between protecting myself and protecting the people I loved. When I opened them again, I had made the decision that I would have to live with for the rest of my career and the rest of my life. "I'm staying," I said firmly. "Implement enhanced security protocols. If there's a genuine threat against federal personnel at this venue, then we treat it like any other protective operation. My family and these wedding guests didn't choose to be part of a security situation, but now that they are, we have an obligation to keep them safe." Johnson nodded grimly, but I could see approval in his expression. "Understood, Agent Thompson. Enhanced security protocols are now in effect." As he and Martinez began implementing the security measures that would transform Rachel's elegant wedding into a federal protection operation, I realized that everything I had been hiding from my family for 6 years was about to become unavoidably public in the most dramatic way possible. The quiet government worker my family thought they knew was about to be revealed as someone whose job required the kind of security typically reserved for world leaders and cabinet members. And Rachel, who had spent the morning criticizing my lack of success and professional achievement, was about to discover that her younger sister's career was considered so important to national security that the federal government was willing to turn her wedding into a military-style operation to keep me safe. The irony wasn't lost on me that this revelation was happening on the one day when I had genuinely wanted to simply be Emma, the sister, rather than Agent Thompson, the federal law enforcement officer. But as I watched my colleagues coordinate with local authorities and position additional security throughout the venue, I realized that I had never really had the luxury of separating those two identities. I was always going to be both Emma and Agent Thompson. And today was the day when my family was finally going to understand what that really meant. The transformation of Grand Oak Manor from elegant wedding venue to federal security facility happened with the swift precision of a military operation. Within 15 minutes of my decision to remain on site, discreet metal detection equipment appeared at every entrance. Additional personnel materialized throughout the property wearing earpieces and carrying the subtle but unmistakable bearing of armed federal agents. And what had been Rachel's dream wedding began morphing into something resembling a state dinner with maximum security protocols. I watched this unfold from the security office monitors, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on my shoulders like a lead blanket. Every guest who would be inconvenienced by security screening, every delay in the ceremony schedule, Every moment of confusion and concern that my family was about to experience was a direct result of my presence and my career choices. The professional side of me knew that I was following proper protocols and making the safest decision for everyone involved, but the sister in me was witnessing the systematic destruction of Rachel's perfect day. Agent Johnson appeared beside me at the monitors, his expression carrying the focused intensity of someone coordinating multiple moving parts of a complex operation. Agent Thompson, we've established secure perimeters and begun guest screening procedures. Local law enforcement has been briefed and positioned at extended checkpoints. We're as ready as we can be given the venue limitations. Through the monitor showing the main entrance, I could see the first effects of enhanced security on Rachel's wedding guests. Well-dressed men and women in formal attire were being politely but firmly directed through metal detectors by agents who were doing their best to maintain an atmosphere of respectful caution rather than obvious threat response. The expressions on the guests' faces ranged from confusion to annoyance to genuine concern as they realized that something significant was happening beyond normal wedding security. How are they explaining the security measures to the guests? I asked, knowing that the cover story would need to be both believable and non-alarming to prevent panic while still ensuring compliance with necessary safety protocols. Standard language about enhanced security due to the presence of federal personnel, Martinez replied, monitoring communications from agents positioned throughout the venue. We're telling guests that it's a precautionary measure and apologizing for any inconvenience, but not providing specific details about the nature of the potential threat. The delicate balance between transparency and security was evident in every interaction I could observe through the monitoring system. Guests were being processed efficiently but thoroughly, with agents maintaining professional courtesy while conducting searches that would identify weapons, explosives, or communication devices that might be used to coordinate an attack. The irony that Rachel's social gathering was receiving the same level of security typically reserved for presidential events wasn't lost on me. A commotion near the bridal suite caught my attention on one of the monitors, and I realized that my family was about to be directly confronted with the reality of what enhanced federal security meant for their understanding of my career and the current situation. My father, Robert, appeared to be having an animated discussion with an agent who was explaining why family members also needed to be screened and interviewed as part of comprehensive security protocols. Agent Thompson, Sarah Mitchell, appeared in the security office doorway, her professional composure finally cracking under the pressure of trying to coordinate a wedding that was rapidly becoming something entirely different from what she had planned. I need guidance on how to handle the family questions about what's happening. Your parents are asking for explanations that I'm not qualified to provide. The moment I had been dreading since this crisis began had finally arrived. My family needed answers about why their daughter and sister's job required the kind of security response that was transforming Rachel's wedding into a federal operation. And those answers couldn't be provided through careful euphemisms or vague references to government work anymore. I'll speak with them directly, I said, knowing that this conversation would forever change how my family understood my career and my life choices. Agent Johnson, can you maintain coordination while I brief the family on necessary security procedures? Affirmative, he replied, but his expression carried a warning that I understood perfectly. Agent Thompson, remember that operational security still applies to family briefings. You can explain the security requirements without compromising classified information about specific threats or intelligence sources. I nodded my understanding while preparing myself mentally for a conversation that would require revealing more about my professional life than I had shared with anyone outside the federal law enforcement community in 6 years. Walking back toward the bridal suite felt like approaching a courtroom where I was both the defendant and the witness, in a case that would determine the future of my relationships with the people I loved most. The scene I encountered in the bridal suite was unlike anything I could have anticipated when I had left to attend the security briefing. My family was clustered together in animated discussion while Rachel sat in front of her makeup mirror, staring at her reflection with an expression of shock that suggested she was still processing the revelation about my actual career. The room that had been filled with excited wedding preparation energy now felt heavy with confusion, concern, and the kind of tension that comes with learning that everything you believed about someone was fundamentally incorrect. Emma, my mother Linda said as soon as I appeared in the doorway, her voice carrying a mixture of relief and anxiety that suggested she had been imagining worst-case scenarios about why federal agents were conducting security operations at her daughter's wedding. "Honey, we need you to explain what's happening here. Your father has been questioned by federal agents, and they're telling us that we need to be interviewed for security clearance before we can attend the ceremony." The words hit me like physical blows as I realized that my family was experiencing the full impact of federal security protocols that I had seen applied to countless other situations, but never to people I personally cared about. Being interviewed for security clearance meant background questions, identity verification, and the kind of scrutiny that would make them feel like potential suspects rather than family members attending a wedding. "Mom, Dad," I said carefully, positioning myself so I could address everyone in the room while maintaining eye contact with Rachel, whose expression suggested she was still trying to reconcile the sister she thought she knew with the federal agent who was now controlling the security at her wedding. "I need to explain what's happening and why these security measures are necessary." My father stepped forward, his expression showing the controlled concern of someone who was trying to remain calm while dealing with circumstances that exceeded his understanding or experience. "Emma, the agent who interviewed me said that you're assigned to Presidential Protection Detail. Is that true? Are you actually responsible for protecting the President of the United States?" The directness of his question required an equally direct answer, and I realized that this moment represented the end of 6 years of careful deception and the beginning of a completely different relationship with my family based on truth rather than protective lies. "Yes, Dad," I replied, feeling the weight of that admission settle over the room like a revelation that changed everything. "I'm Special Agent Emma Thompson, United States Secret Service, assigned to the Presidential Protection Detail. For the past 3 years, I've been part of the team responsible for the President's personal security." The silence that followed was profound and uncomfortable, broken only by the distant sounds of security operations being conducted throughout the venue. I could see my family members processing this information at different speeds, with some immediately grasping the magnitude of what I had been hiding, while others appeared to be struggling with the basic concept that their daughter and sister held one of the most elite law enforcement positions in the country. Rachel finally turned away from her mirror to face me directly, her expression showing a complexity of emotions that suggested she was wrestling with feelings of awe, betrayal, and perhaps the first recognition of how completely she had misunderstood my life and career choices. "Emma," she said quietly, her voice lacking the confident authority that had characterized her earlier criticism of my failures and limitations. "When you said you did administrative work for federal agencies, you were talking about protecting the president. When you said you did travel coordination, you meant coordinating security for Air Force One and presidential trips." "Yes," I confirmed, watching as she continued to process the implications of what this meant for every conversation we had ever had about my career prospects and professional achievements. The vague descriptions I gave about my work were necessary because specific details of presidential security operations are classified information that can't be shared with unauthorized personnel. My mother moved closer, her expression showing a mixture of pride and concern that suggested she was beginning to understand not just the prestige of my position, but also the inherent dangers that came with being responsible for protecting the most targeted person in the world. "Emma, honey," she said softly, "does this mean that you're in danger? Is that why there are federal agents here today?" The question went to the heart of what was happening and why Rachel's wedding had been transformed into a federal security operation. But answering it required explaining threat assessment procedures and intelligence operations that I couldn't discuss in detail even with family members. "Mom, there's been intelligence suggesting potential threats against federal personnel attending public events today," I said carefully, trying to provide enough information to explain the security measures without compromising operational details. "The agents here are implementing precautionary protocols to ensure everyone's safety." My father's expression darkened as he processed the implications of what I was saying. "Emma, are you telling us that your presence at Rachel's wedding has put everyone here in danger? That people might be targeting this event because you're here?" The accusation in his voice was unmistakable, and I realized that I was facing the question I had been dreading since this crisis began. My family needed to understand that my career involved risks that could potentially affect them, but they also needed to understand that those risks were being managed by professional security protocols designed to protect innocent people. "Dad, the nature of my job means that I'm always a potential target for people who want to harm the government or disrupt federal operations," I replied, meeting his gaze directly while trying to convey both the seriousness of the situation and my commitment to protecting everyone present. But that's exactly why we have security protocols and trained agents who know how to handle these situations. Rachel stood up from her makeup chair with movements that seemed deliberate and controlled, as if she was trying to maintain composure while processing information that was fundamentally changing her understanding of her own family dynamics. So the reason you could never commit to family plans, the reason you missed holidays and birthdays and important events, it wasn't because you didn't care about us, she said slowly. It was because you were protecting the President of the United States and couldn't tell us where you were or what you were doing. The realization in her voice carried a weight of understanding that suggested she was connecting years of perceived slights and disappointments to a completely different explanation than the one she had been operating under. Rachel, there were times when I wanted to be here more than anything, I said honestly, feeling the emotional weight of 6 years of missed family moments and misunderstood priorities. But when the president travels or when there are security threats, the protection detail has to be available regardless of personal plans or family obligations. The conversation was interrupted by the appearance of Agent Martinez in the doorway, his expression carrying the urgency of someone with important operational updates that couldn't wait for family discussions to reach natural conclusions. Agent Thompson, he said formally, we've completed guest screening and identified several individuals whose backgrounds require additional verification before they can be admitted to the ceremony area. The words sent a chill through the room as everyone realized that the security threat was potentially more immediate and specific than the general precautionary measures we had been discussing. The possibility that actual hostile actors might have attempted to gain access to Rachel's wedding made the situation feel suddenly more dangerous and more personal. What kind of additional verification? I asked, automatically shifting into the professional mode that separated Agent Thompson from Emma as I prepared to deal with concrete security concerns rather than family relationship issues. 3 guests presented identification that doesn't match our database records, and 2 others triggered alerts based on travel patterns that suggest possible surveillance activities. Quote, Martinez replied, consulting his tablet for specific details. We need your authorization to proceed with enhanced interrogation or removal from the premises. I felt the weight of command responsibility settle over me as I realized that decisions I made in the next few minutes could determine whether Rachel's wedding proceeded safely or whether we needed to implement full evacuation protocols that would end the celebration entirely. Give me 5 minutes to complete this family briefing, I said to Martinez. Then I'll review the suspect identifications and make decisions about how to proceed. He nodded and withdrew from the doorway, but his presence had served as a stark reminder that we were dealing with an active security situation that required immediate attention regardless of personal considerations or family dynamics. Emma, my mother said quietly, her voice carrying the concern of someone who was beginning to understand that her daughter's job involved making life and death decisions about people's safety, including the safety of her own family. What does enhanced interrogation mean? Are there really dangerous people trying to get into Rachel's wedding? The question highlighted the surreal nature of what was happening and the impossible position I found myself in as both a family member and a federal agent responsible for everyone's security. Rachel's elegant social gathering had become a potential target for hostile actors, and I was the person who had to decide how to balance family relationships against federal security protocols. Mom, it means that trained agents will ask detailed questions to determine whether these individuals represent legitimate wedding guests or potential security threats. I replied, trying to provide reassurance while being honest about the seriousness of the situation. The goal is to identify and remove any actual threats while allowing legitimate guests to attend the ceremony safely. Rachel moved toward me with an expression that suggested she was struggling to reconcile her desire for a perfect wedding with her understanding that people's safety was more important than social celebrations. Emma, if there are people here who might be dangerous, if your job has put my wedding guests at risk, then what do we do? She asked. Do we cancel the ceremony? Do we evacuate everyone? What's the right decision when you're responsible for protecting people but you're also my sister who wants me to have the wedding I've dreamed about? The question went to the heart of everything I had been wrestling with since this crisis began. Rachel was asking me to choose between my professional obligations and my family relationships. But she was also recognizing that those 2 responsibilities weren't necessarily incompatible if handled correctly. Rachel, the right decision is the one that keeps everyone safe while preserving as much of your special day as possible, I said, meaning it completely, while also recognizing that achieving both goals would require careful coordination and probably some compromises that neither of us would find ideal. But if keeping people safe means turning my wedding into a federal security operation with metal detectors and interrogations and armed agents everywhere, then it's not really my wedding anymore, is it? She replied, her voice carrying the sadness of someone who was watching her carefully planned celebration transform into something entirely different. Before I could respond to her question, the sound of multiple vehicle engines and radio chatter from the venue parking area indicated that additional federal resources were arriving on site. Through the bridal suite window, I could see black SUVs and unmarked sedans taking positions around the property perimeter, suggesting that the threat assessment had escalated beyond what could be handled by the agents already present. Agent Thompson. Sarah Mitchell appeared in the doorway again, her expression showing the strain of trying to coordinate a wedding that had become a federal security operation. The additional agents are requesting immediate consultation with you about crowd control and potential evacuation procedures. The words evacuation procedures hit the room like a death sentence for Rachel's wedding celebration, and I could see the devastating realization spreading across her face as she understood that the event she had been planning for 18 months was potentially about to be canceled due to circumstances completely beyond her control. Emma, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, they're going to shut down my wedding, aren't they? All these guests, all this planning, everything I've worked for, and it's going to be destroyed because dangerous people are targeting my little sister. The pain in her voice was almost unbearable, and I realized that I was facing a choice between protecting Rachel's dreams and protecting everyone's safety, with no option that would satisfy both requirements completely. Rachel, I don't know yet what the final security assessment will determine, I said honestly. But I promise you that whatever happens, the decision will be based on keeping people safe, not on destroying your special day. She nodded, but I could see tears forming in her eyes as she struggled to accept that her perfect wedding was being held hostage by federal security concerns that she had never imagined could affect her personal life. Agent Thompson. Martinez called from the hallway, his voice carrying the urgency of someone who needed immediate decisions about operational procedures that couldn't wait for family conversations to reach comfortable conclusions. I looked around the room at my family members, seeing their faces reflect a mixture of pride, concern, fear, and bewilderment, as they tried to process the revelation that their daughter and sister held a position of such importance that the federal government was willing to shut down a wedding to keep her safe. I have to go deal with the security situation, I said, feeling the weight of responsibility for both my family's safety and their emotional well-being. But I want all of you to know that whatever happens today, whatever decisions have to be made about the ceremony, I'm going to do everything in my power to protect both your safety and your celebration. As I moved toward the door to meet with my security team, I heard Rachel's voice behind me, softer than it had been all day but carrying a strength that suggested she was beginning to understand the magnitude of what I dealt with in my professional life. Emma, be careful, she said. Whatever these people want, whatever threat they represent, please be careful. I may not have understood your job before, but I understand now that it's dangerous and important, and I need my little sister to come home safe. The words followed me as I left the bridal suite to face whatever security crisis was developing outside, carrying with them the weight of family love and the recognition that Rachel finally understood who I really was and what my career actually meant. But as I prepared to make decisions that could end her wedding celebration, I also carried the burden of knowing that understanding my job and accepting its consequences were two very different things, and that the choices I made in the next hour would determine whether my family's newfound respect for my career would survive the reality of what federal security protocols meant for their personal lives. The security briefing that awaited me outside the bridal suite was unlike anything I had experienced in my 3 years on the Presidential Protection Detail. Agent Johnson stood surrounded by tactical displays, communication equipment, and federal personnel, who had transformed the venue's administrative offices into a command center that rivaled those used for major state functions. The efficiency of the operation was impressive, but the reason for its necessity sent cold dread through my professional assessment of the situation. Agent Thompson. Johnson said as I approached the central briefing station. "We've identified and detained 3 individuals attempting to gain access to the venue using falsified credentials. Under interrogation, they've revealed information about a coordinated surveillance operation targeting federal personnel attending family events nationwide." The scope of what he was describing exceeded even my worst-case scenario planning. This wasn't an isolated threat against me personally or a random targeting of Rachel's wedding. This was evidence of a sophisticated intelligence operation designed to identify and exploit the personal vulnerabilities of federal agents and other government personnel. "What's the current threat assessment for the venue?" I asked, knowing that the answer would determine whether Rachel's wedding could proceed or whether we needed to implement full evacuation protocols that would end her celebration permanently. Martinez consulted multiple data streams on his tablet before responding. The detained individuals had detailed floor plans of the venue, guest lists, and surveillance photos, documenting your arrival and family interactions. However, we found no evidence of weapons, explosives, or immediate plans for physical attack. The information provided some relief, but it also highlighted the disturbing reality that someone had been conducting extensive reconnaissance on my personal life with professional-level thoroughness. The level of detail they possessed about Rachel's wedding suggested resources and planning capabilities that went far beyond typical domestic threats. Agent Thompson, one of the tactical specialists called from a monitoring station, "We're receiving reports of similar surveillance operations at events in Washington, Chicago, and Los Angeles, where other federal personnel are present. This appears to be a coordinated intelligence-gathering effort rather than an immediate attack scenario." I felt some of the tension leave my shoulders as I processed this information. Intelligence gathering, while serious and concerning, was fundamentally different from active targeting for physical harm. It suggested that whatever organization was responsible was in the reconnaissance phase of their operations rather than the execution phase. "What are the operational recommendations?" I asked Johnson, knowing that his assessment would determine the security protocols for the remainder of the day. "Enhanced security remains in place, but we can proceed with modified event protocols," he replied. "The threat has been assessed as surveillance and intelligence gathering rather than immediate physical danger to attendees." The words I had been hoping to hear finally came through federal channels, and I realized that Rachel's wedding could proceed, albeit with security measures that would make it unlike any social gathering she had ever imagined. The relief I felt was tempered by the understanding that my family would now live with the permanent knowledge that my career made them potential targets for hostile surveillance. "Agent Johnson," I said, making the decision that would define how this day concluded, "I want to proceed with the wedding ceremony under enhanced security protocols. The family has been through enough disruption, and they deserve to have their celebration, even if it looks different than originally planned." 20 minutes later, I stood at the back of the Grand Oak Manor's main ballroom, watching Rachel walk down the aisle in her elaborate ivory gown, while federal agents positioned throughout the venue maintained discreet but visible security presence. The ceremony was proceeding, but it was taking place under circumstances that no one could have anticipated when the invitations had been sent 18 months ago. The transformation was remarkable in its professionalism. What could have been an obvious federal security operation had been implemented with enough subtlety that most guests appeared to accept the increased security as an unfortunate but manageable inconvenience, rather than evidence of serious threat assessment. The agents positioned throughout the venue maintained their professional demeanor, while allowing the celebration to proceed with minimal interference. Rachel looked radiant as she exchanged vows with David, her smile genuine despite everything that had happened in the hours leading up to this moment. Watching her embrace her new husband, while surrounded by family and friends who had no idea how close they had come to evacuation, I felt a deep satisfaction that we had managed to preserve her special day while maintaining everyone's safety. The reception that followed was unlike any social gathering I had ever attended, with federal agents stationed at every entrance and sophisticated surveillance equipment monitoring the celebration for potential security concerns. But it was also a genuine celebration, with dancing, speeches, and all the traditional elements of a wedding reception that Rachel had been planning for so long. Near the end of the evening, as guests were beginning to depart and the security protocols were being gradually reduced, Rachel approached me at my position near the main entrance. She had changed from her wedding gown into a simpler dress for the reception, but she still carried herself with the radiant happiness of a new bride. "Emma," she said, positioning herself so we could have a private conversation despite the ongoing security presence, "I owe you an apology that's bigger than anything I can put into words." I started to respond, but she held up her hand to stop me, clearly having prepared what she wanted to say. "For years I've been treating you like you were failing at life, like you needed my guidance and protection to succeed in the adult world," she continued. "I've been condescending and dismissive about your career choices, your lifestyle, and your priorities. And all this time, you've been protecting the President of the United States, while letting me believe that I was more successful than you." The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable, and I could see that the events of the day had fundamentally changed how she understood our relationship and our respective roles in the family. "Rachel, you didn't know," I said simply. "I chose not to tell you because my job requires discretion, not because I wanted you to misunderstand my situation." "But that's exactly my point," she replied. "I should have asked more questions, shown more interest in what you were actually doing instead of just assuming that I understood your life based on limited information. I should have recognized that someone as intelligent and capable as you wouldn't be content with genuinely entry-level work." Looking at my sister, I realized that the day's events had created an opportunity for honesty that hadn't existed before. "Rachel, can I tell you something that I've never said before?" She nodded, clearly prepared to listen in a way that suggested our relationship had shifted onto completely different ground. "There were times when your success and confidence made me question whether I had made the right career choices," I admitted. "Watching you build a visible, celebrated career while I had to hide what I was doing, there were moments when I wondered if I should have chosen a different path." "Emma, you're protecting the President of the United States," she said, her voice carrying a mixture of awe and incredulity. "You're responsible for the safety of the most powerful person in the world. How could you ever question whether that was the right choice?" "Because success isn't always measured by importance or responsibility," I replied. "Sometimes it's measured by whether the people you love understand and appreciate what you're trying to accomplish." Rachel was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of someone who had gained a completely new perspective on family relationships and personal priorities. "Emma, I want you to know that I'm proud of you in ways that I'm still learning how to express," she said. "And I want you to know that from now on, I'm going to be the sister who supports your choices instead of the sister who questions them." 6 months later, I received a handwritten letter from Rachel that began with an apology and ended with an invitation. She had been promoted to vice president at her marketing firm, partly based on her newfound understanding of how to work with high-pressure, high-stakes situations that required discretion and professional judgment. The skills she had developed dealing with federal security protocols at her own wedding had apparently translated into valuable business capabilities, but more importantly, she had begun volunteering with organizations that supported federal law enforcement families, helping other people navigate the challenges of loving someone whose job required sacrifices that civilians didn't always understand. She had found a way to use her own experience of misunderstanding and ultimate recognition to help other families bridge similar gaps in communication and appreciation. The invitation was to a small dinner party at her new house, specifically designed to celebrate my recent commendation from the Director of the Secret Service for exceptional performance during a classified protection operation. It would be a private family gathering where I could be both Emma and Agent Thompson without having to choose between those identities. As I prepared to attend that dinner party, wearing civilian clothes but carrying the quiet confidence that came from knowing my family finally understood who I really was, I reflected on how completely our relationship had changed since that morning in the bridal suite when Rachel had criticized my simple black dress and questioned my life choices. The woman who had once seen me as the disappointing younger sister now introduced me to her friends as her sister, who works in federal law enforcement, with a tone of pride that suggested she finally understood the difference between visible success and meaningful achievement. The transformation in our relationship had been as dramatic as the security operation that had surrounded her wedding, but it had led to something more valuable than either career advancement or social recognition. It had led to genuine understanding, mutual respect, and the kind of family bond that could survive both professional secrets and personal misconceptions. And perhaps most importantly, It had taught us both that success comes in many forms, some of which require protection and discretion, rather than publicity and celebration. Rachel's wedding had indeed been unforgettable, though not for any of the reasons she had originally planned. But in the end, it had given us both something more valuable than a perfect celebration. It had given us the truth about who we really were and what we meant to each other. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.